Delighted that you have a show because you're fresh, you're funny, you're great. And I want you to know something. From my heart, I never liked you.
Don Rickles was the undisputed king of insult comedy. From Frank Sinatra to Ronald Reagan, he roasted them all, and they absolutely loved him for it. In Hollywood, getting insulted by Rickles was a badge of honor. It was a sign that you had finally made it. He was lovingly nicknamed Mr. Warmth, a perfect ironic title for the man they also called the Merchant of Venom. For more than 50 years, he stood on stages in Las Vegas, on late-night TV, and even at presidential inaugurations. And he never, ever held back. He took aim at the biggest stars, the most powerful people in the room, and he always made them laugh. It was his magic trick. He could turn a savage insult into a term of endearment, all built on the idea that with enough charm, you could say anything to anyone. He was friends with everyone he roasted. But there was one star who didn't seem to play along, one person who was the exception to Rickles' golden rule. Hollywood has always whispered about one impenetrable fortress, a man whose cool, serious demeanor was a riddle Rickles could never quite solve. This is the story of the one man Don Rickles truly couldn't stand. It's not a story of open warfare, but of a quiet, simmering frustration that tells us more about Rickles, his comedy, and the nature of fame than any of his onstage jokes ever could. It's the story of what happens when the unstoppable force of insult comedy meets the immovable object of Hollywood royalty. To understand the legend of the one man Rickles supposedly hated, you first have to understand Rickles himself and the bizarre, beautiful art form he perfected. Donald J. Rickles wasn't born into show business. He was a kid from Queens, New York, born in 1926 to a Jewish family. He grew up in Jackson Heights, served in the Navy during World War II, and when he came home, he had a dream that had nothing to do with comedy. He wanted to be a serious, dramatic actor and even studied at the prestigious American Academy of Dramatic Arts. But finding roles as a serious actor was tough. To make ends meet, he started performing stand-up in nightclubs, and it was there, in the smoky rooms of 1950s America, that he accidentally discovered the act that would define his life. His prepared jokes just weren't landing. So, out of sheer frustration, he started talking back to the audience and the hecklers. He began firing off lightning-fast, surgically precise insults. And a funny thing happened. They laughed. They laughed harder than they had at any of his jokes. He realized his real talent wasn't in reciting lines, but in the spontaneous, chaotic dance of insult comedy. The core of his philosophy was revolutionary for the time. Everyone was a target. In an era of deep social divisions, Rickles was an equal opportunity offender. He made fun of Italians, Jews, the Irish, Poles, you name it. He leaned into stereotypes so hard they became absurd, not because he believed them, but because by mocking them so openly, he took away their power. He always said the key was to insult everyone, so nothing felt personal. The biggest joke of all was the absurdity of prejudice itself. His act wasn't about hate. It was about the shared ridiculousness of being human, and people couldn't get enough of it. He became a staple on TV, especially on The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson and the Dean Martin Celebrity Roasts. On these shows, he was a human hand grenade. The other guests would visibly tense up when he walked out, not with fear, but with giddy excitement. Who was he going to destroy tonight? Being insulted by Rickles became a sign that you were famous enough, powerful enough, and most importantly, secure enough to take a joke. The roast was his natural habitat. Surrounded by the biggest names in entertainment, he was a maestro of mayhem. He once looked at the legendary Bob Hope and said, "We kid about great stars such as you, Bob. Why? 'Cause you're old and washed up." He told Ronald Reagan, "Governor, I say from my heart, I'm fed up with you." And to Clint Eastwood, he quipped that Clint's horse was making a better living than most actors. The genius was that it never felt truly mean. Underneath the venom was a genuine warmth and affection that everyone could feel. He was Hollywood's court jester, the only one who could speak truth to power, even if that truth was just a really, really funny insult. Off stage, he was the complete opposite. He was known as a kind, humble, and loyal man, married to his wife, Barbara, for over 50 years. Friends described him as genuinely warm. This contrast was the secret to his success. The audience knew the guy on stage was a character. He wasn't there to hurt people, he was there to make them laugh. And that's what makes the story of the one person who seemingly broke that spell so fascinating. In the world of old Hollywood, there was one king whose approval could make or break you, Frank Sinatra. Sinatra was a cultural institution, a figure of immense power, and a guy with a notoriously thin skin. Crossing Sinatra could be career suicide. Yet, it was this very man who became Don Rickles' greatest champion. Their friendship gave Rickles a kind of diplomatic immunity, allowing him to say things no one else would dare. Their first meeting is the stuff of Hollywood legend. It was 1957 at a club in Miami. Rickles was still a nobody, and Sinatra, the biggest star on the planet, was in the audience. Seeing him, a nervous comedian might have choked. Rickles saw an opportunity. He looked right at Sinatra and said, "Make yourself at home, Frank. Hit somebody." The room went dead silent. Sinatra's crew tensed up. You just didn't talk to Frank. Sinatra liked that. Sinatra stared at Rickles for a long moment, and then he burst out laughing. A deep, genuine belly laugh that told everyone in the room that this new kid was not only funny, he was fearless. From that night on, Sinatra was his biggest fan. He'd show up at Rickles' shows with his Rat Pack buddies, and his laughter was the ultimate seal of approval. If Frank could take a joke from this guy, then everyone else had to. Their friendship was perfect. Rickles got a shield, and Sinatra got a court jester who could prove to the world he had a sense of humor. One of their most famous stories perfectly captures their dynamic. Rickles was on a date and wanted to impress the woman who didn't believe he actually knew Sinatra. Rickles walked over to Frank's table and asked him, as a favor, to stop by and say hello. A few minutes later, Sinatra walks up to Rickles' table and says, "How are you, Don? Nice to see you." Without missing a beat, Rickles looks at him with total annoyance and snaps, "Not now, Frank. Can't you see I'm with somebody?" It was so audacious that it became Sinatra's favorite story to tell. This bond was Rickles' armor. It sent a clear message to Hollywood. If the chairman of the board not only took Rickles' insults but loved them, who were you to get offended? This is what makes our central mystery so confusing. If Rickles could get a laugh out of Frank Sinatra, why was there one star, decades later, who remained a locked door? For decades, the formula worked. Rickles could stand in front of anyone, and through sheer force of will, turn them into a fan. But Hollywood has long held onto a story of one major exception. It's not a story about a public screaming match. It's a quieter, more fascinating tale of a comedic force of nature meeting, an unmovable object, and the name at the center of this legend is Denzel Washington. The rumor, which has circulated among comedy nerds and Hollywood insiders for years, isn't about explosive hatred. It's about a quiet, deep frustration on Rickles' part. According to the whispers, Rickles, whose entire act relied on getting a reaction, found Denzel Washington's persona impossible to break through. Washington, a two-time Oscar winner, is known for his serious, dignified, and intensely private personality. He has an air of unshakable cool, and it was this very quality, the legend says, that drove Rickles crazy. Rickles' comedy was a two-way street. He'd throw out a line, and the target's reaction, a laugh, a smirk, a playful groan, was the punchline. But with Washington, Rickles supposedly hit a brick wall. No visible reaction, no crack in the facade. For a comedian who lived on reading people, it was like telling a joke in a vacuum. It wasn't just that Washington wasn't laughing, it was that he offered nothing back. And this, so the story goes, gnawed at Rickles. It's rumored that Rickles complained about it privately. There's a quote, almost certainly fake but repeated because it's so perfect, attributed to Rickles. He makes Mount Rushmore look like it's in motion. Whether he actually said it doesn't really matter. The quote stuck because it paints the perfect picture, the fast-talking comic trying to get a rise out of the stone-faced movie star. Now, we have to be clear. This is all based on rumor. There are no on-the-record accounts from Rickles or anyone in his circle confirming a real problem with Denzel Washington. Unlike his friendships with Sinatra or Carson, which are documented with countless interviews, the Rickles-Washington story exists almost entirely in the realm of speculation. It's a Hollywood myth. But it's a myth that has survived because it sets up a fascinating clash of personalities. What happens when the man who roasts everyone meets the one man who seems unroastable? The answer, or at least the fuel for the legend, can be found on one memorable night on late-night television. But before we break down the one TV moment that has fueled this rumor for years, we want to ask for your support. If you're enjoying this dive into the hidden corner, grow and ensures you won't miss what's next. Now, back to the story. The whole legend of a Rickles-Denzel feud comes down to a single TV appearance. The date was January 15, 2008, on The Late Show with David Letterman. Denzel Washington was the first guest. Then, in a very unusual move, Denzel decided to stay on the couch when the next guest was introduced. That guest was, of course, Don Rickles. The stage was set. On one side, the revered Oscar-winning actor, the definition of cool. On the other, the 81-year-old merchant of venom, as sharp as ever. Washington's choice to stay was a clear sign of respect. He wanted a front-row seat to the Don Rickles experience. What happened next became the key piece of evidence for everyone who believes in the silent feud. Rickles came out swinging, just like always. He immediately locked on to Washington, pretending to be confused. "Why is he sitting here?" Rickles asked Letterman. "Does he have to clean up or something?" Washington roared with laughter, clapping his hands. Rickles continued, turning to Denzel. "You're a big star, and he's sitting here with a little Jew. You're not gonna go any place with me." He then added, "By the way, I was never in one of your movies. I could have played the guy picking the cotton. We'd fake it." Again, Denzel laughed hard, along with the audience and Letterman. On the surface, it looked like a classic Rickles bit. He was doing his act, the star was loving it. But believers in the feud theory see it differently. They claim that while Denzel was laughing on the outside, his posture was still too cool, and that Rickles' jokes had an extra sharp edge. They argue Rickles was trying harder and harder to get a real reaction out of him, and when he couldn't, he got frustrated. The problem with that theory is that it requires you to ignore what you can see with your own eyes. If you watch the clip, which is all over the internet, Denzel Washington isn't stoic at all. He's smiling, clapping, and laughing throughout the entire segment. The idea that he was a stone wall just isn't supported by the tape. In fact, a Slash Film article about the moment noted, Washington laughs and claps his way through the entire segment. It was clear from the start that no one wanted this more than Washington. So where did the myth come from? It seems to have grown in the retelling. The story just got more dramatic over time, and that Mount Rushmore quote was probably invented, later to give the legend some extra spice. The story of Rickles' secret frustration is just way more exciting than the simple truth. It was a pretty standard and very funny Don Rickles TV spot. The Letterman incident wasn't the start of a feud. It was the raw material used to build a Hollywood myth. It shows how much we want to believe in secret celebrity drama. The reality is that the immovable object was having a fantastic time. The footage shows a fan, a huge movie star, who was thrilled to get roasted by a comedy legend he admired. The feud doesn't exist in reality, but in the gap between what actually happened and the more dramatic story we wish were true. So if the evidence isn't there, why won't this rumor about Rickles and Denzel die? The answer is that it's the perfect Hollywood legend. It's a story that's just too good not to be true. First, you have that irresistible narrative of the unstoppable force versus the immovable object. Don Rickles was the unstoppable force. For over 50 years, no one was too famous to escape his insults. Denzel Washington is the immovable object, an artist with an aura of untouchable dignity. The idea of these two clashing is just inherently dramatic. It's way more interesting than the boring reality of mutual professional respect. Second, the rumor works because it slightly misunderstands Rickles' comedy in a modern context. His style came from an anything-goes era where insults were designed to feel a little dangerous. But today, some of those jokes land differently. When he made that crack about picking cotton, it sounds much harsher to a modern audience. While Rickles' goal was to mock stereotypes into absurdity, some people today might only hear the offensive surface. This generational gap makes it easier to believe real animosity was behind the words. The legend was also helped by the fact that Rickles never went out of his way to deny it. He loved having theatrical feuds with people as part of his act. His silence on the Denzel rumor just let it grow and take on a life of its own. It fit his persona, and finally, it's just believable enough. Rickles did have professional disagreements with other performers. He wasn't a fan of Joan Rivers's comedy, feeling she'd made insults too mean-spirited. He also wasn't big on Howard Stern's shock jock style. These weren't tales of deep hatred, but they show he was protective of his art form. These real stories make it easier to believe a similar friction could have existed with Washington. Ultimately, the Rickles-Washington legend is a perfect storm of a great story, a cultural misunderstanding, and just enough circumstantial detail to seem plausible. It's a piece of modern folklore that says more about our own fascination with celebrity conflict than it does about the two men involved. Don Rickles built his career on a beautiful contradiction. He was the merchant of venom with a heart of gold. For more than half a century, he proved that a joke, when told with the right spirit, wasn't an attack, but a weird form of love. His friendship with Frank Sinatra, the most feared man in show business, was the ultimate proof. He could roast anyone, and they would thank him for it. The persistent Hollywood legend that he secretly couldn't stand Denzel Washington is the one great exception to his life's work. It's a fantastic story, fueled by a single TV appearance and the powerful image of two titans clashing, but when you look closer, the story falls apart. The video evidence shows what looks like a moment of mutual admiration, a comedy icon doing his thing, and a movie star who was genuinely thrilled to be a part of it. The story of Rickles hating Washington is, most likely, just a myth. It's a piece of Hollywood folklore that got better with every retelling because it's more entertaining than the truth. It shows how much we, the audience, love to imagine. Drama behind the curtain. In the end, Don Rickles' legacy is perfectly intact. He was a master of his craft who understood how to turn an insult into a compliment. The only person Don Rickles truly hated wasn't a person at all. It was anyone in the room who couldn't take a joke. So, what do you think? Was this a genuine hidden feud that Rickles took to his grave? Or is it just a Hollywood legend that got out of hand? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.